Hello to anyone watching this. One of the most important parts of any Mario spin-off game is of course its character roster. And while these have gradually grown over the past couple of console generations, it's not exactly been in a way that everyone can appreciate. While there has been a more positive trend towards unique and sometimes even creative character choices, it has come at the expense of more popular mainline characters not getting much time in the sun, or even long-standing characters who used to appear all the time getting relegated to free DLC or just straight up not appearing at all in some games. So today I just wanted to think about what the best possible set of 20 characters could be that you could put into any spin-off game and have hopefully no one complain about it. You know, as many popular characters as possible while still having interesting choices in the mix. And also I'm going to be looking back through every instance I can find of an exactly 20 character roster to see just how well they represented the entire Mario franchise at the time of their release, and if it can help inspire me with my final choices. So first of all, I just want to outline my overall philosophy when it comes to crafting Mario character rosters, and this mainly stems from how disappointed I've been with the launch rosters of especially the sport games this generation. Like, obviously Strikers Battle League is disappointing on several extra levels, but mainly Mario Tennis and Golf, sticking to having 16 characters at launch just feels really played out at this point. You know, 16 has been the standard since like the N64 era, so for that to continue up until now, it just starts to feel annoying at a point, especially when there are so many more characters to represent than ever. 16 just feels like such a limiting number, so I think bumping it up even just to 20 gives the rosters a lot more breathing room at a base level. And I do mean at a base level. Like, this set of 20 is just what I'd want to have at the start of the game. You know, obviously I want rosters to be as big as they possibly can, so this is just what I'd expect before you can unlock characters or get characters through DLC or anything like that. I just think if you have these 20 all the time, it'll feel like nobody's missing out, nobody's been robbed of a slot, unless you're like a really specifically dedicated fan to a very specific minion who, if you can honestly tell yourself deserves a slot in every single game, you're just lying at that point. And before I get into slagging off all the previous attempts at 20, I just want to stress that this is all just a nice little thought experiment, you know. I get way too obsessive over Mario character rosters, so having an opportunity like this to just natter about what I'd like to see in future, even if none of this comes to pass, I just find there's a nice sense of optimism to this all, you know. Even if this specific set of 20 isn't the base for future games, just having all of them appear in any capacity always makes me happy with a roster. So just getting a chance to talk about who I like and why I like them, you know, this is all just nice at the end of the day, I think. So getting into all of the previous attempts, I do have a surprisingly high amount of ground rules that I'd like to state, because it's surprisingly tricky finding such a perfectly round roster throughout the series. Like, I've only been able to scrape together about a dozen different attempts, and some of them are extremely based on technicalities at that. So the main rule that I went for is that these groups of 20 have to be either a completed roster or a base roster. You know, nothing in between. I think the best example for this is Mario Kart Wii, where you can unlock all but 4 characters through the Grand Prix. You know, that's just not a fair count, because you could go piss off and unlock Baby Luigi and Funky Kong, then do so many cups and have 20 characters through that. You know, that just creates too much confusion. So I want the 20 to be either at the start or the end of a game's life. But at the same time, I'll also be counting games that were in the middle of updates when they hit exactly 20 characters. Because, like, that's the total amount that you can access in the game at that point. So even though that wasn't intended to be the full roster, it's still the full roster at the time of that update. So I'm totally going to count that. And I'm also going to be including characters that aren't playable in every mode in a game, or are only selectable opponents, or aren't the main focus characters. Just if they're selectable on a screen and the screen has 20 or 21 or something to that effect, I'll count it here. So yeah, just expect plenty of technicalities, but you know, at the same time, I'm just talking about a general group of 20 characters, so as long as you can accept that as the reality of what I'm doing, then I think it's all going to work out fine. So let's start with Mario Kart, which has 3 different rosters represented here, each of which go to sort of different ends of the spectrum of the types of rosters that I'm going to be talking about today. So beginning with Double Dash, this is just a really lovely, well-rounded roster that perfectly represents the Mario series at the time of release. You know, you have all of the classics, you have emerging favourites like Daisy, Waluigi and Birdo, and you also have Peach Piranha and King Boo, which represents the, at the time, modern era of the series. You know, this is an absolutely perfect roster for the time that would absolutely not translate well to the current day. Like, basically, its only problem is that it couldn't have possibly had Rosalina or Pauline or anyone more modern than the GameCube as a part of its roster, which is obviously not its fault, but you know, it's not the best base to go off of for my selection of 20. So now let's move on to the very technical Mario Kart DS roster, and oh dear, see, this is another problem we're going to see moving forward. This one just has too much minion representation. You know, as much as I love the little guys and think that they should take up as many slots as possible on an expanded roster, when you only have a choice of 20, you really need to be harsh to make sure you can represent as many different types of characters as possible. So yeah, there's just a few too many minions on this list, but I don't really think there could have been many ways to avoid that at the end of the day. And the last Mario Kart roster here is the initial New York Tour launch roster for Mario Kart Tour, and it's really no wonder why so many people gave up on the game after a couple days. Like, I get that Luigi and Rosalina and Bowser Jr. and pretty much everybody who really should have been in the game at launch was added within the next few weeks, but still, this roster just feels so hollow. Like, there's 4, or if you want to be really petty, 7 clone slots. It's just a bit of a mess. Like, especially for a very casual gaming audience that just wanted to hop in and enjoy some Mario Kart, I can only imagine how horrified they were seeing that this was all the characters they got at the beginning of the game. So, like I said, while this did get updated and, you know, the 245 additional characters on top of this very much made up for how lackluster this was, just still, they really could have picked a bit better with who they launched the game with. So yeah, that's all of the examples from Mario Kart. I hope that you're starting to understand how kind of petty and nonsensical this is all turning out to be, but anyway, let's move on to Mario Party. Obviously, the only examples for this come from the Switch generation, because they've never really had enough time or resources to add in more than about 12 characters before now, but Let's start with the most recent example in this entire lineup, Super Mario Party Jamboree's base roster. And I do think it turned out to be quite relatively well balanced, like especially the hero side of things is incredibly solid, even though Diddy is extremely missed. It's just, again, I feel like there's a bit too much little guy representation in this group of 20, like, while I absolutely would not want to swap any of them out, now that I know that they're solidified and confirmed to be in this roster, I do think there are missed opportunities to not have even more wild selections that represent more varied games. Like, unironically, if they'd have put in Fire Spike instead of Spike, and Spike was just scattered around as NPC again, I think that would have been a better outcome almost, just to have any sort of representation for Mario Wonder, you know? So while I can poke holes in this roster, I do think it's overall a really good selection, you know? Definitely better than the original Super Mario Parties, which, now that we have Jamborees to compare it to, it's sort of shocking how much of a mess this roster is looking back on it. Like, the minion problem is dialed up to 11 here, due to the game's insistence on having an even split between heroes and villains, you know? Especially having both Koopa Troopa and Hammer Bro here, I've increasingly grown to dislike. You know, I find them too similar to justify having both of them, at least in a 20 character roster. You know, if it was Fire or Boomerang Bro, I'd be a lot more lenient, but for them to both be Green Shell Turtles, it just doesn't hit that right for me. Like, they really could have gone for something else, I think. Like, maybe Spike. And also, while Toad and Toadette were obviously in their hosting era at this point, they do feel extremely missed from the hero side. Like, the fact that almost half of that lot could easily be considered villains just makes it feel even more lopsided than it already is. So, while I do individually love a lot of the choices that this roster made, like I said, especially now we have Jamboree to compare it to, this roster is just a bit of a mess at the end of the day. Like, it's objectively one of the best Mario Party rosters, but as a roster of 20... So, moving on from Mario Party, but sticking with board games, we have the mandatory, extremely obscure game that only a few of you will have heard of from the last time a YouTuber referenced it as an extremely obscure game. It's Yakuman DS. And this is surprisingly the best roster so far, at least based on the time that it came out. Like, you have all of the possible standard favourites you could ask for. It has a really compelling and appropriately sized selection of enemies. It even has a good couple of curveballs with P.T. Piranha, and especially Toadsworth. Like, this roster has everything. You know, apart from the fact that you can only play as characters from the middle row, and the other 14 are only selectable as NPCs. So that completely ruins this game that I was never even going to get a chance to play anyway. But anyway, let's move on to the sports games, and I'll start with Strikers as it only has the one example with Charged, and this is again a very solid selection, you know, especially the captains with P.T. Piranha as a nice oddball pick are a really good lineup. It's just the sidekicks sort of inevitably skew into minions and end up getting them once again a bit too overrepresented, but you know, that's entirely not this game's fault. You know, that's just how the sidekick system was going to work, so I can't blame it for that. And again, it's just a really good selection overall, just not as an overall representation for the Mario series that I'm aiming for. Next, let's get on to Mario Tennis, starting with 64, where there was so few characters in the series at that point that they just had to start making them up with your Waluigi and generic humans. But at the same time, I do think this is once again a perfect representation of the series at the time, you know? it even reached into then obscure corners of the series with Daisy. So while this is absolutely not a good roster for the current day, this was just absolutely perfect for what it was, really. You know, it brought in a lot of playable characters for the first time ever that before then you probably never would have thought of playing as. And now we get to skip straight to the most recent game with Ace's October 2018 roster, which is definitely a victim of not having all of the characters it wanted to put out yet. Like, especially if Pauline and Luma had been in some of the earlier months instead of maybe Blooper and Koopa Trooper, this would have been a much better rounded roster, but due to the way that it was at this point, it does end up looking quite minion skewed. You know, as much as I love Spike, I'm still in awe that he was in the base roster of this game. So yeah, I do think that this game blossomed into something even better, but at this point it just wasn't anything too spectacular, especially by the time of the Switch era. Now I want to talk about the Mario and Sonic series, and it's not due to the beloved 20 character roster that features in most games, because, you know, it's obviously not the best representation of Mario characters, although if I was talking about a 10 character roster, I'd absolutely go for this bundle. I'm here to talk about the Rio 2016 3DS roster, because as you can see, this game has 40 characters still split evenly between the two series, meaning that it has 20 Mario bastards to talk about, and I do think it's an overall quite good selection. You get all of the mainstays you could possibly ask for. Nabbit's always a really good pick to have. It's just the minion selection that's obviously a touch off. Like, there's a good number of them for once. It's just the fact that 4 of them are Koopalings makes it feel lopsided in its own special way, you know? And there's just something inherently unsatisfying about not having all 7 of them. Like, I wouldn't want Nabbit, Dry Bowser and Dry Bones swapped out for the other 3, but still, it just feels a bit off, so I can't really say it's an overall good selection of 20 to represent the whole series, but given how this game was structured and how half of these buggers can't play in more than one event, you know, the shotgun approach works here. But moving on, while we're on the topic of crossovers, and to make sure that I've covered all of my bases, I just wanted to go over the Mario representation in Smash Bros, because Ultimate finally has 20 proper Mario characters, including the Koopalings, and yeah, this is really not what I'm looking for. Obviously the minion representation is very much skewed by all of the turtles, so it doesn't come off at the most balanced. Obviously King K. Rool is an amazing pick that I really hope can star in more than just baseball games one day. And obviously the fact that there's no Waluigi is a very clear hole in this selection. But I do think if there were 20 wholly unique Mario characters in Smash, that it would come out a lot better than this unfortunately skewed selection that we have here. You know, obviously I like what we got and it can't help looking like this. Just like I said, there are 20 of them, so I just felt like covering it. And I can also count Smash 3DS and Wii U if I include the crossover characters that were in main Mario games. Oh no, that's actually really embarrassing. Let's just move on. Why did I even want to talk about Smash? Oh god. So anyway, lastly is Mario Golf, starting with Super Rush 3.0, and this is quite a good selection. You know, Pauline is obviously a very nice modern inclusion, and you do get quite a lot of the main characters that you'd want, but Diddy Kong and Birdo feel like quite glaring absences from this selection, and once again that's seemingly because there's too much of a skewing towards minions Even though I think this is one of the most compelling and well-rounded selections of minions out of any game, you know, it's still just a couple too many for my taste, at least in terms of a well-rounded 20 Mario roster. You know, this is a perfect number of enemies otherwise, don't get it twisted. So lastly, we have Mario Golf World Tour with all of its DLC included, and oh god, you just swapped like Gold Mario for Pauline. That's like literally the exact roster I'd suggest, minus the Mii's because that's the 21st character. How about that? Oh my god! Yeah, this is literally perfect. Like, obviously Gold Mario is a bit of a blemish, but he was just a little pre-order bonus with the DLC, and if he wasn't here I'd just include the Mii's instead, and that would be a perfectly sufficient replacement. So yeah, this is amazing. You have every era represented, you have every main character that you'd want, you have a good number of enemies with diversity in terms of both importance and like body shape and living status. Like, stop me if I'm going mad, but surely this is like the 20 character roster that everybody would be happy with, and it's not appeared in any game, not even Mario Kart Tour, because it couldn't be bothered to add in Paratrooper. So yeah, I guess the best ever 20 Mario character roster is stuck on the 3DS right now. So yeah, I guess that's it. I don't even need to put that much of my own thought into it. It's just right there. Don't even need to passionately design any graphics for it, because I can just like put Pauline's little PNG in Gold Mario's place, and there we go. So yeah, like I said, this is all just for fun, and I always enjoy bitching about Mario rosters under any context, and jumping from series to series is always a treat. So had a lot of fun with this, and like I said, just being able to get the idea out there of just this 20 Mario character roster that can just be copied and pasted into any game, and then you can just have whatever spikes, Ninjas, P.T. Piranhas, King Bob-ombs clipped onto it to make it more impressive depending on what sort of game it is. Like, I just think that's what the series needs going forward, just a consistent main cast, so no one feels left out, no one feels like they need to be added in later on. You just get everyone that you could reasonably ask for straight out of the box. Like, I think that's what Nintendo players deserve, unless they want Link a part of this 20 character roster or something like that. But yeah, if you have any questions or concerns, do let me know. Just whenever I see a completed roster, the first thing that I like to do is pick out my 4 favourite characters, so that I know what my favourite group to play with is. And with the selection of Bowser, Nabbit, Birdo and Boo, I think that's like one of the most unstoppable forces in all of gaming. But bye bye, have a nice day.